world of diasporic life and culture as portrayed in the work of two prominent contemporary authors, Jhumpa Lahiri and Kiran Desai. To guide us through these compelling themes, we are honored to have with us National Faculty Professor Nazia Hassan, working as faculty member in Women's College, Aligarh Muslim University since 2002. She teaches various English literature paper to undergraduate and postgraduate students. Her area of interest is post-colonial Indian fiction. Before I invite Professor Nazia, I would like Dr. Sadaf Fareed, course coordinator, Gyan course, to present KIT to our speaker. Please join me in warmly welcoming Professor Nazia Hassan as she takes us on a journey through the diasporic world created by Lahiri and Desai. Please come, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Please start the PPT, ma'am.
I think, yes.
And how do I change the slides from here?
You can use that, this as well, or you can just change them directly from it.
Right. Thank you. Good afternoon. Am I audible, participants? Right. So we are here to discuss identity, culture, and diaspora in the works of the two writers mentioned here, Jhumpa Lahiri and Kiran Desai. Both of them have connection with India, and Jhumpa Lahiri especially has the experience of living as a diaspora person. I press the end button, Maisha. Right. So this is the list of my readings, some of the books that I try to read and understand. I must mention that in the last 2 centuries, there has been a redistribution of people all over the globe. And I have given some details here. There is almost a kind of mass movement of people. And that's why George Steiner called the 20th century as the age of the refugees. And this mass movement consists of all kind of people. They could be intellectuals, scientists, they could be workers, refugees, and other kind of people. I have mentioned donkey also. I'm sure you are familiar with this term, made popular by Bollywood, because donkey is not just a fictional thing, it is very much real. And people do take this route. And then I believe Adam and Eve were the first people or human beings who were sent on exile, who experienced diaspora. Literature, people cannot stop themselves thinking of the mythology. And diaspora has, of course, become an extensive semantic domain today. It has many terms to it now. And so some of the terms are mentioned here. I see a very usual pattern when we talk of diaspora. It begins in two ways. Diaspora, people who become part of the diaspora community, they can sometimes, they are refugees, sometimes they are the willing people who are ready to leave their borders and set up another home at another place. So for those who go for diaspora willingly, I use this term, the rosy path. Rosy path, familiar term? Is the other term also familiar? Primrose path? So rose and primrose both are flowers. The rosy view or the rose tinted view, that is a common thing. I came across this term, primrose path also, which means that a way or an activity which may appear to be very interesting, attractive, but the consequence may not be good. So sometimes that has been seen in some of the diaspora stories, diaspora experiences. Dislocation does happen. I'm sure you have been hearing about these terms several times in the last 2 days. There is acculturation, hybridity, cultural conflict, generational differences, unhomeliness, and then the concept of identity that we are trying to understand. So the two writers taken are, of course, Jhumpa Lahiri and Kiran Desai. And the text from Jhumpa Lahiri's, however, that I'm going to talk about are these. These are novels as well as short stories. And I would like you to know a bit about the context of these texts. So beginning with Jhumpa Lahiri, I'm trying to give you an idea about the background of some of the stories that I have taken up. So some of the characters in her novels and short stories are the aspiring students, very much like you and me perhaps, and they are trying to get to America and UK. There are some characters who are new brides or homemakers, and they have been taken to unknown places. Then there is one particular novel, The Low Land, which deals with the Naxalite movement, and then diaspora. Kiran Desai's novel has a background of the GNLF uprising, that is Gorkhaland Liberation Front uprising. Then there is one short story, especially when Mr. Pirzada came to dine. You have the background of the Bangladesh liberation movement. And you may wonder, why am I telling you about these contexts? I'm trying to tell you and make you understand that how diaspora comes into being. It is not made up of only those people who are aspiring for something and who try to make a new home overseas. This is also made up of those people who go through some kind of trouble, some kind of turmoil. There could be a political disturbance in the country or the place where they are living, or some other economic issues may be there, social issues may be there, and they end up leaving the country. The recent details tell us that India is one of those countries from where most of the people are going abroad. That is another point of discussion. So, with this brief background, I'm going to take the text one by one, just briefly, and then we will look at some of the issues. So, in most of these diaspora-related stories, we find students as characters, students who have gone to study abroad in the West. They come from middle-class people. And the third and the last continent is one particular short story in which we meet these students directly. How do they live? What do they eat? How do they deal with these memories in where they remember their maa ke haath ka khana, and they have to live on milk and bread only with a limited budget. Then we meet these boys, especially these are men and boys. I couldn't come across any female student going abroad for education. The female characters are mostly in the role of a wife, right? Then most of these stories are within the time frame of 1960s to 1980s, right? So 1960s, you find these Indian students going abroad, and perhaps there could be some reason. I tried to know the reasons. And I'm told that this is the period where Asians in the West were very visible. And some of the thinkers and writers of the time, they have complained that the streets and roads of America and UK are choked with Asians, right? India dominating, India, China. And, but these Asians are no longer doing the menial jobs. They are going as professionals. They are going as doctors, academicians, scientists, and even yoga gurus. And the reasons that I tried to find, it is that, yes, of course, there was the colonization which had taken place. It had already made the Western world aware of the wealth of India. That could be one reason. The Margaret Thatcher government turned very liberal in the 1960s, and that made UK to open its door much wider, because they were trying to bring more capitalism, a stronger capitalism to UK especially, right? So the students were one of the good mediums to get more capital. And they became professionals. They made part of the cheap labor available from Asia especially. The other reason could be the Fordist movement. Fordist movement, which happened due to the policy changes made by Henry Ford, who gave the world some of the wonderful automobiles. And he came up with the idea of the 8 hours work with good wages, right? So the wages attracted more and more people from across the world. And Antonio Gramsci, the philosopher, he has written about it in his prison notes, that the Fordist movement became a reason of globalization to a great extent. Am I comprehensive enough? Am I going too fast? Fine enough? Right, thank you. So after the Cold War, after the 1950s, America also was going through changes. And so more and more people were welcomed. Now going back to the students living in US and America, US and UK, we find that these are boys who are the good boys, studious, hardworking, and faithful, loyal. They do not date American girls. Rather, they get married to only those strangers whom the family chooses. And they make the first generation in Jhumpa Lahiri's world, right? The first generation Indians settling down or studying there. And they earn a good reputation of being good workers. That is noteworthy. All of them are good workers. The companies like them as employees. However, Jhumpa Lahiri's world or works, they get alive when it comes to the female characters. And that is what we are concerned with. These female characters, they are mostly new brides or homemakers who are now taken to those places of the world which they have not read about much or even heard about, some of them, beyond the geography classes. And so we can understand that culture shock is a common part of their experience. And the efforts that they make in setting up their new home, that makes an important part of Jhumpa Lahiri's stories. Is it an important change? Is it a good change? That a woman, how is she dealing with the heartbreak on the kitchen table when she tries to make macher jhol or a dish made by her mother, and it turns out to be much different because it does not taste the same way. It does not smell the same way. So these are small parts, but they take you closer to the women, right? Women characters. So And because they are homemakers, they do not go out much. We can expect their experience. Are they going to be very excited living in America? Some of them may be. Today, your reaction will be much different. There was no social media, there was no mobiles, right? And telephone was not easily available to everyone. So they depended on letters. And letters played its own game. You have one particular reference to the letters in the novel Namesake. So they all felt lonely. That is a real thing. They felt lonely because the men folk, they left their home early and they returned late. And some of them have been shown crying during night, during day. Of course, raising a child was a great challenge for them. Now, these things may sound like mundane things, but when you read about these very real issues in the story, that makes a wonderful story, because these are issues with which a human being is dealing, right? And they all dream of going home. That is another aspect of diaspora, that returning home is a very important part of their experience. Although Amitav Ghosh says that Indian diaspora is peculiar, he believes that Indian diaspora is made up of most of those people who do not want to go back to India forever. They want to keep a relationship, but they want to settle down because they believe in their capacity to recreate a mini India wherever they go. And perhaps that is something you find in most of the countries. When I went to Singapore or Thailand, they had a mini India market. An entire setting was Indian. So this is one aspect. But for these ladies, they did dream of going back home forever. The men did not, right? So returning back to home for most of the diaspora people had various connotations. At one level, it was an emotional fulfillment. At another level, it acquired an eschatological connotation also, which is related to a theological issue, which means that going back to home was something spiritual. They wanted to go home in order to get a spiritual fulfillment. And they shared a particular notion of the homeland. Salman Rushdie calls it the imaginary homelands. All the diaspora people who think of their home. Sometimes this imaginary homeland notion, it acquires the status of being a mythical vision also, right? And sometimes it acquires a metaphysical connotation also. So going back home is a very important, essential issue for these people. The displacement and the disruption do have a deep effect. We can make that out very easily. And I noticed one thing, that when these young ladies, they spend most of the time alone, they cry, men go silent, the husband characters. They buy more fish, they buy more vegetables, but they don't buy flowers. Because Indian men also took time to understand, like Indian women took time to understand and to assimilate the Western things. So there are details about food. For example, there is this very interesting scene right in the beginning of the Namesake, where Ashima, the pregnant woman, she is trying to make a concoction of grains and pulses, right? Which is called, in Bengali, we call it jhal muri. You have bhel puri. She tries to make that again and again, but she does not get that taste, because the onion has a different taste or the mustard oil has a different taste. And she says one thing, Lahiri writes one line, which I believe that it sums up the entire experience of the diaspora life. She says, this jhalmuri, she does not name it jhalmuri, she calls it a snack. जिसमें सारा मज़ा ख़त्म हो जा रहा है भेलपुरी और झालमुड़ी का. So she says that this is a humble approximation of the snack, okay? But something is always missing. Diaspora life for these women is like this, that there is everything, but there is something missing over there. Then, so by these small tales, what is Jhumpa Lahiri doing? She is adding a new dimension to the diaspora studies by giving a central position to the marginalized characters of the women, right? Women who did not make part of most of the diaspora experience so far. That is what I have written in the slide here. And other issues that we find in the lives of the women, like diaspora experience can disentangle gender subordination. So most of these women, relatively, they have a better life. If you compare their life with their sisters living in India, they have more freedom, they have more choices. But sometimes the diaspora experience reinforced the patriarchal structure. If you look at the life of women in Saudi Arabia, for example, perhaps there was a reinforcement of the patriarchal practices, as I read in some of the texts. But of course, we cannot generalize. There have been all kind of people and all kind of experiences. The gender roles are renegotiated. That is one thing which we notice. Then diaspora can become a site of support as well as oppression. Both things have happened, and they can be found in some of the works. And when looking at these homemakers and women's experience, I must refer to what L.P. Hartley said in his book, The Go-Between. And Salman Rushdie has quoted that line so in such a convincing way that the line has become immortal. Hartley wrote that the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. Rushdie believes that for these ladies in diaspora, it is not the past which is foreign. Past is home for them. The present is the foreign, right? So this is the transformation which they have to deal with, the change which they have to deal with. And when you look at the character of Mrs. Sane, an eponymous character, you find that she is one of those ladies who is unable to cope with this situation, that she is living so far away from her home. And she fits in the category of those people in diaspora about which Edward Said has written. Edward Said, in his essay, The Mind of Winter, and I have taken up some of the important points of this essay, that there is an essential sadness of the break away from the homeland which cannot be surmounted. Mrs. Sane fits into this category. You find her talking about home all the time, right? And whenever she refers to home, she does not mean the apartment in Boston where she is living. She means India. She means that gully in which her parental house is there. Then Edward Said also says that the estrangement may have a crippling effect. And we find Mrs. Sane going through a strange kind of, you can say, a complex in which she does not feel confident much. She tries to learn how to drive a car, and she fails in the test various times. So the crippling effect that Edward Said talks about, although Said's write-up is in the background of the Palestine genocide, all right? It is very much there. But some of the things may be applied to these characters. And these women, they feel weak, they feel lonely because they feel deprived of the nourishment which is provided by tradition, family, and geography. So the nourishment that you get from your connection with the home, that is broken. They depended on letters and telegrams which took days to reach each other, right? So this is how we find the women. And I have noted some of the comments of Ashima in the namesake, where she talks about her position as a woman in diaspora. She says being a foreigner is a sort of lifelong pregnancy. It is a perpetual wait. What is that wait? Waiting to go home, right? Then when her child is born, the child is going to be born, she is in the hospital, and she thinks she is terrified to raise a child in a country where she is related to no one. There is no one except the husband, where she knows so little, where life seems so spare. Then she pities the child and says that she had never known a person entering the world so alone, so deprived, the unborn child. So the mother is thinking about the child who will have to deal with more loneliness because there are no relatives or close friends over there. But these female characters, they do succeed in making that third space, a theory given by Homi K. Bhabha in the book, The Location of Culture. And this third space is made up of these elements. Hybridity is there, assimilation, acculturation. Do I need to explain these terms? You adopt these, they adopt certain things from the foreign culture, and then there is a process of rehabilitation which they have to begin with. They have to try to rehabilitate themselves in this new country. They have to overcome the unhomeliness. Unhomeliness is another important term in diaspora studies given by Bhabha. And Bhabha explains the term unhomeliness in this way. This is the third space explained. It is an in-between setting where all the things of culture may acquire a new meaning. Okay, the symbols may acquire a new meaning. There is no stability, and some signs can be rehistoricized and read anew. So many of the rituals, many of the activities, even for example, making tea in the morning, it acquires a new meaning due to the assimilation and the acculturation and the changes which happen in both, in the lives of both men and women. Then there is the name conundrum also in the namesake, if you have read that novel, that the male character Gogol has trouble in accepting the two names given to him, Gogol and Nikhil. And I will come to this issue later by the end of the lecture. Ashima the mother and Gogol the son, both of them deal with this diaspora experience in two different ways. You must have come across the phrase given by James Clifford, where he says that diaspora life is very much from roots to roots. Roots with double O, right? And roots with R-O-U-T-S. So for Ashima, she has to accept the second route, R-O-U-T-E, that she has to traverse across various passages in order to adjust with the diaspora situation. And Gogol is able to accept his name, Nikhil and Gogol, and they are two such different names. Gogol coming up for the Nikolai Gogol, the Russian writer, and the famous works that he has given. Gogol has to understand that he perhaps cannot accept himself unless he knows his roots, his background, his connection with India, his connection with Ashima, right? So I'll come back to this. And there is another female character whom I must mention. She comes from the novel The Lowland, written in 2013. She is a first generation woman, but she is very different from all these other female characters of Jhumpa Lahiri. She comes from a background of the Naxalite uprising in Bengal. There was a police crackdown and her husband is killed. She takes help of the husband's brother, marries him, goes to America, has a child, and she should have behaved like Ashima and Mrs. Sen, raising the child very carefully, giving it all the love. But this character named Gauri Mitra, she has a strange tendency. For the common readers, we may call it a strange tendency. But for those of us who are familiar with psychology, the psyche, the post-delivery changes which come over a woman, or a woman who has suffered a lot in the patriarchal system, like that of a suburban area of Kolkata, and she literally escapes from that place because she had this unhomeliness experience even in her own home, be it the parental home or the in-laws. She was never comfortable. So unhomeliness is something which do not experience only in the state of being a diaspora, but it can be anywhere else also. And when she reaches America, she gets her wings. So instead of India, it is America where she feels much more at home, and she does something unacceptable for the readers. She deserts her child, 3-year-old child is left in the custody of the stepfather, and she goes out to another university, joins the university, and becomes a professor, a philosopher, a successful person. So here we can find that diaspora serves various purposes. Diaspora, as I told you right in the beginning, that it can be a site of oppression, but it could also be a site of opportunity. Gauri Mitra utilizes this as an opportunity, right? Although, as the novel is entitled The Lowland, she never reaches the peak. She reaches the peak of success, but in personal life, she suffers. The unhomeliness continues because she is never accepted by that deserted child, Bela, right? But to some extent, or perhaps diaspora stories have all these multitudinous to itself, that people go out of their country or leave their borders, sometimes compelled by the situation, but also sometimes by choice. And why do they make those choices? When you look at Gauri Mitra's character, the patriarchy, the traditional society, the stereotype society, they all become a kind of, you can say, things which break her. And she tries to make herself a complete person once again by the opportunity provided by diaspora. She acquires a new identity. And she is granted an agency when she is away from her own home. Now from here, let me take up Kiran Desai, and the most important work that I came across related to diaspora is The Inheritance of Loss. It's a very popular text. And we have the time frame of 1980s, but there are also flashbacks of 1940s, all right? So there are two characters who experience diaspora in two different ways, completely different ways. The story is set in Kalimpong in the Himalayan mountain range, and this very beautiful, harmonious place is suddenly rocked by the Gorkhaland demand for Gorkhaland, and the Nepalis living there, they are up with arms against the Indian government. So the two characters whom we meet, one of them is Jemu Bhai, whose real name is Jemu Bhai Popatlal Patel from Gujarat. And another character is Biju. Both of them come from different classes. Okay, one goes to Cambridge for a law degree. The other one goes to America, New York City, illegally as a cook. And both of them experience diaspora. Jemu Bhai Popatlal Patel had been able to go to Cambridge by the dowry money. All right? He was married off to a girl, and the money which came with the marriage, that helped him to go to Cambridge. And when he returns, a Vilayat returned judge, he returns as a completely changed person. When you look at his character, he may remind one of what V.S. Naipaul wrote about himself in the novel The Enigma of Arrival, which is much autobiographical. And we get to see how Naipaul felt uncomfortable in England, and he thought of returning back from England, although he stayed back. But for some time there was that unhomeliness, K.K. Bhabha's theory, unhomeliness that he experienced. For Jemu Bhai, he is a person who returned and he started calling himself James Patel, right? So he was a victim of cultural denigration which happens when a person is too impressed by another culture and internalizes the inferiority which is, you can say, given to this person by the superior culture, supposedly superior culture. Anita Desai, in her novel Bye Bye Blackbird, she calls these kind of characters, the England returned characters who felt uncomfortable in India, he called them Macaulay's bastard. Do we know the context? Lord Macaulay's minutes about Indian education system, how he wanted to raise a group of brown people but educated in the English pattern. And James Patel calls himself a self-proclaimed Anglophile to such a level that he's unable to connect with his wife, he's unable to talk to his parents, he does not like anything Indian, right? And so he could be called the mimic man, a theory once again given by Bhabha. And he becomes a blurred copy of a Western man. So how will this person live in India? He is a judge, a very powerful position, but he does not like anyone. He is unable to tolerate anyone. By the end of the novel, we get to see that his life, all his pleasures come from the pet dog and not from anyone else, not even from the grandchild Sai. And when he was in Cambridge, he was teased for his body smell, he was teased for his complexion. And I believe that he internalized the entire idea of a colonized person or the Eastern person as presented in the colonial discourse. He took it too deeply, he took it too seriously. So he looks like a clownish figure who covers himself from head to toe, even in the dead of the summer. He wears gloves and socks when it is sweating hot, and he does not want to be visible to anyone directly in the sun. He is so conscious of his color, his accent, everything about himself. That must have been quite torturous, isn't it? Biju, on the other hand, he was an illegal migrant. That itself made him be in a very insecure position. And he was exploited, he was underpaid and deprived of a decent life. He calls it a pig's life. And he wants to return back home. Although he had gone with the American dream that he will prosper, he will become a rich person, but situation or the sense of loss that he feels, the rift that he feels from his homeland, the unhomeliness which comes over him gradually, not in the early days but in the later days, that makes him decide to go back to home. A poor person going home, that is a big decision. And when he returns with this, once again, the utopian connotation and the eschatological connotation, where he believes that perhaps going home will be the only cure he needs. And he returns poorer than the poor, losing everything that he had acquired. So looking at both these characters in Inheritance of Loss, I find that there is a pattern of racial discrimination, racial bias, which both of them suffer. And for Biju, for example, physical survival was a daily struggle. He experienced human degradation, and he was a victim of this long history of the meaning of color in some of the incidents which take place. And by these two characters, I tried to know what is racism. Racism is something very common, of course. We use this term almost every day. We come across so many examples. But how does it take place? How does one become prejudiced against somebody just because of the color of the body? I wanted to know how is body, or how was body looked upon in different periods of time by different cultures. So these are a few of them. Race is, of course, imposed. It is never chosen. We never knew that we are, as colonized, we are the inferior people. We were made to believe, right? Then there was a mind-body dichotomy for a long time, which elevated the concerns of the mind and it neglected the body. This was one phase. Then there was a concentration on the spiritual aspect of the human body. So the body was neglected, the mind and the spirit of the person became important. Then bodily characteristics were used to measure the mental ability and the human worth. What kind of a person I or you are, that depended on the appearance and the bodily features, characteristics. Then there was another phase and another culture where human bodies, this is one important point. At present, when we look at these historical aspects of looking at the body, we get to know that human body is not only a natural entity, but it is a social entity and it is a cultural entity, about which the feminist Judith Butler says that bodies are culturally intelligible. You read bodies, you don't only meet a person, but you read a person. You read the person's mind through the body. And Frantz Fanon, the theorist, post-colonial theorist, he said that body is directly involved in the political field. Politics is not only a game of the mind or a game of the power and the powerlessness, rather it is played on the body of the people. How? Because whenever there is a change, we experience that change through the body. And I would like to read one particular line given by Frantz Fanon. He said in the book Discipline and Punish, the body is directly involved in the political field because power relations have an immediate hold upon it. They invest it. The body is invested by the people in the power. They mark it, They train it, they torture it, they force it to carry out tasks, to perform ceremonies, or to emit signs. Social media nowadays is replete with discussions on the body, isn't it? We are told that we should not body shame, but most of the discussion that they are doing, this is very much like a practical aspect of the body shaming. So Frantz Fanon says that power relation is played on the body of the person. Which place do you have? A person in power will inflict pain upon the body of the powerless person, right? And of course, we cannot forget Edward Said, who gave the theory of Orientalism. In that book also he discusses human body and how anatomy for women has been called to be the destiny, right? But anatomy or human body for male and female both, that made the destiny during the colonization period and even later on and before that. Frantz Fanon, in his book Black Skin and White Mask, said that cultural identity is very much related to the body impression that you make. Once again, referring to the race, the color. And in the book Wretched of the Earth, written by Michael Foucault, he also deals with race and the body and the mind, human mind. And I have taken up this particular definition of colonization, rather explanation of colonization given by Frantz Fanon, where he says that colonization was not merely satisfied with holding a people in its grip and emptying the native's brain of all form and content. How did they do it? Perhaps through all the things which they brought to the colonized people, through the education system, through the products which they brought here. For example, there is a very interesting article written about the soap, how West brought soap to the colonies and how did they made a good market for soap. Fair and Lovely is now something which is happening. Imagine the earliest of the time when an Indian person in a village was introduced soap. Kya reaction raha hoga? Khauf, suspicion, and then they sold it to us and we bought. We are living in soap bubbles all the time now. So they empty the mind and the brain of the colonized people, and by a perverted logic, colonization turns to the past of the oppressed people, distort it, disfigure, and destroy it. It is a reference to the various policies which were made, and education policy was an important factor. That's why Jemu Bhai can be called the Macaulay's bastard. And they made us look upon ourselves as the other. I have written many things with reference to the text, but perhaps we don't have that much time. So the success of colonization depended on this particular theory which they applied upon the colonized people, that when they created their colonial discourse, they made us look upon ourselves through their eyes. कभी देखा है अपने आप को दूसरों की नज़रों से? बहुत अलग तस्वीर सामने आती है. We all estimate ourselves in a particular way. We all think that I am this. But listen to those gossips and the backbiting, and you find a totally different picture of yourself. That is what was happening to the colonized people. We were made to see ourselves as inferior people, as the other. Other, which is the opposite of the colonizers, who are powerful, who are superior, who are intelligent, and we were just the opposite. Literature is replete with examples of that. Then this formula of power and knowledge played an important role. And why am I telling you all these things? I'm trying to make sense of what happened to Jemu Bhai Popatlal Patel. Why did he change? There was almost a kind of metamorphosis of this person, because he had internalized all this othering in England, and he returned as a person who did not find home anywhere. He rejected everybody, he rejected everything, and lived alone in a dilapidated bungalow. So, in the context of these novels, when we get back to the idea of cultural identity, how can we explain identity? Identity, first of all, it is not something transparent, and it is not something unproblematic. And Stuart Hall says that identity is a production which is never complete. Identity is a process. Okay? We are all the time becoming something. We are not something in ourselves. The identity that we boast of, or they are happy or unhappy about, it is not something given to us. It is something that we acquire over a period of time, and that never completes. The process of acquiring that identity, it never completes. And another important point that Stuart Hall gives is that identity is always constituted within representation. Once again, how we look at ourselves and how others look at ourselves. How is a person or a place or a culture represented by others? That makes important part of the identity. So what is cultural identity, and what is this cultural identity which has to be protected by Ashima, Mrs. Sen, and everybody in diaspora? Is it something which is like the seed of the person, the true self, which remains same, unsullied, unspoiled, unchanged, even after all the experiences? Perhaps not. Okay? Identity does not remain unchanged. Rather, all these theorists, Stuart Hall, Frantz Fanon, Michael Foucault, they come up with this idea that identity is a process which continues, and Stuart Hall says that identity is the name that we give to ourselves in different positions. So today, you or I may be one person with one identity. Tomorrow, our identity will change. In diaspora, perhaps that happens much quickly and much frequently. And the experiences of representation, that is a very important topic, but due to paucity of time, I'm not going into the details. If representations make the identity of the person, then characters like Jemu Bhai, Biju, and Gogol, they all had the experience of having a fragmented identity. Fragmented due to the way they were represented. Now, nobody told them that you are an Indian, you are black, you are inferior. It was something subtle which happened to them. To Jemu Bhai, there were a few instances. For example, a group of girls teased him that he smells of the curry. And now curry is the most favorite dish of UK. But subtle things kept happening to them, which made them insecure and uncomfortable and feel unhomely. So this fragmented identity which they acquired, in the case of Jemu Bhai especially, education had played an important role, and that's why Gauri Vishwanathan called the Britain introduced education system the mask of conquest. They were successful, they conquered over India. Due to various reasons, this played an important part. And so, cultural identity is a matter of becoming as well as being. Who we are is always layered with what we become with time, with various experiences. And so, getting back to the context of diaspora, what we can say is that diaspora is very much about moving than dwelling, as I referred to James Clifford, roots to roots. In diaspora, we have to acknowledge, or the diaspora people have to acknowledge the presence of diversity instead of focusing on the differences. There has to be an acknowledgement and acceptance of the diversity. But it is not only diaspora which needs to acknowledge that, we all need to acknowledge it now in the way we are living and experiencing the society. Hybridity is natural. For any cultural identity, hybridity is natural. We cannot keep fixed to something. Then identity is never complete, as I said. It is partial, it is plural. This is a term taken from Salman Rushdie, about which he writes in Imaginary Homelands, that the diaspora identity is partial as well as plural. We can never be one complete American or complete British person while living in Britain or America, but we do acquire, through assimilation, we do acquire certain characteristics. And so cultural identity, culture as well as identity, both of these things go on producing and reproducing. It is a process. It is a process which continues till the end, or even after that perhaps. So I end my presentation here. Yes. If you have any query, any observation, you are welcome. May I sit over there? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your insightful lecture. Following this, we will begin with lecture 7 on the topic Diaspora, Linguistic and Cultural Identity Formation. It is our pleasure to invite Dr. Sadaf Farid, course coordinator and assistant professor in English at Women's College, Aligarh Muslim University. Her major academic interests are gender studies, diaspora